Today we travel into the heart of Europe, to a land that once dreamed of empire, glory, and unbreakable power. This is the story of Germany's royal bloodline, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the downfall that changed the world forever. Long before the name Germany united the map, this land was a fractured mosaic of kingdoms. Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, Württemberg, each ruled by proud dynasties who believed they were born to dominate Europe. These were not just rulers. They were families steeped in centuries of tradition, convinced of their divine right to command. But among them, one house stood above all, the Hohenzollerns of Prussia. This was the family that would forge the German Empire under Kaiser Wilhelm I, and later, through arrogance and miscalculation, destroy it under Kaiser Wilhelm II. As the 19th century dawned, a powerful figure emerged from the Prussian aristocracy, Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor. He possessed a singular, relentless vision, a unified Germany, led by Prussia. This was not a dream to be achieved through diplomacy alone. Bismarck's strategy was one of blood and iron. Through a series of calculated and brutal conflicts, the Danish War, the Austro-Prussian War, and finally the Franco-Prussian War, Germany was born. In 1871, in the opulent Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the German Empire was proclaimed, under the watchful eyes of victorious kings and generals. A new superpower had arrived on the world stage. But this unity, forged in the fires of war, came at a steep price. Behind the triumphal march, the gleaming iron helmets, and the patriotic fervor, the old royal families began to fade into the shadow of a new centralized power. The proud kings of Bavaria and Saxony, once masters of their own domains, now swore allegiance to Berlin. Their crowns became symbolic, their armies absorbed into a single imperial force. The patchwork of independent states was now stitched together into an empire, but the threads were pulled tight with political maneuvering and thinly veiled resentment. The Prussian Kaiser now ruled as the emperor of all Germans, but his empire was built on fragile foundations of wounded pride and deep-seated rivalries. And then came the man who would test those foundations to their breaking point, Kaiser Wilhelm II. A grandson of Britain's Queen Victoria, Wilhelm inherited not only a vast empire, but also his family's legendary arrogance and a crippling insecurity. He was impulsive, bombastic, and utterly convinced of his own genius. One of his first and most fateful acts was to dismiss the aging Bismarck, the architect of the very empire he now led. He silenced all opposition, believing that only his vision mattered. Wilhelm dreamed of a world ruled by German might, a place in the sun for his nation. He embarked on a massive naval expansion, building a fleet of battleships to challenge the supremacy of Great Britain, his own grandmother's empire. He raised vast armies, rattled his saber at every opportunity, and spoke of Germany's destiny in grandiose terms. Across the continent, Europe trembled under the weight of this relentless ambition. The intricate system of alliances that had kept the peace for decades began to crack. An arms race of unprecedented scale was underway, and the air grew thick with suspicion and fear. Then came the summer of 1914. A single act of violence in a distant Balkan city lit the fuse. The assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. Caught in its web of alliances and driven by its own aggressive war plans, Germany marched to war. The Kaiser and his generals were utterly confident, believing their armies would conquer Paris and be home by Christmas. They were tragically, catastrophically wrong. Instead of a swift victory, Germany and the world drowned in 4 years of unimaginable bloodshed. The trenches of the Western Front became a meat grinder, consuming an entire generation of young men. 4 years later, the dream of empire had turned into a nightmare. Millions were dead, entire cities lay in ruins, and the German Empire, once the pride and terror of Europe, collapsed almost overnight. Faced with revolution at home and defeat on the battlefield, the Kaiser abdicated and fled into exile in the Netherlands. The once mighty Prussian palaces fell silent and empty. The old kings of Bavaria, Württemberg, and Saxony, who had hitched their fortunes to the Kaiser, lost their crowns as well. For the first time in 1,000 years, Germany had no monarch. All that remained were bitter memories of iron, blood, and tragedy. But the story did not end there. In the ruins of the empire, a new, far more sinister voice began to rise from the chaos. It was a voice that promised to restore German glory, not with crowns and royal bloodlines, but with a twisted ideology built on hatred and fear. And thus began the darkest chapter of all, when the ghosts of fallen kings gave way to the absolute rule of tyranny. The once proud royal families faded completely into exile and obscurity. Some changed their names to escape their past. Some hid away in crumbling castles, hoping to ride out the storm. A few, tragically, even allied themselves with the Nazis, clinging to the desperate hope that they might reclaim what was lost. None succeeded. By the time the Second World War ended in 1945, Germany's royal past was buried under mountains of rubble and an ocean of guilt. The very idea of kings and emperors seemed like a relic from a distant, discredited age. Yet, the blood of emperors still runs quietly through the veins of modern Europe. The descendants of the Hohenzollerns remain without their crowns, without their power, but not without their complicated legacy. Their story serves as a powerful and timeless reminder that even the mightiest thrones, built on foundations of iron and ambition, can be brought to ruin when that ambition burns brighter and hotter than wisdom. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the past. See you next time.